at my favorite part of any illustration, and that's the black ink lines that I use to bring the entire illustration together. So I take some of my black ink, a lot of ink, and I mix it with just a little bit of water just to thin it ever so slightly. It just makes it a little easier to paint with and glide off the brush. So once you have the mixture that you're looking for, after you've tested it on your paper, you want to take a really pointy 000. You want to have like a new brush or one that's really retained its point throughout your painting process for any fine details. And, test the small brush on your paper. And once again, I'm just going to start at the hairline, the root of the hair, just where, shadow naturally lies, and there's just going to be a darker line. And I'm just going to sort of work out, strands of hair. I'm going to work on the ink lines that I've already done in previous steps, and then I'm going to sort of work around them in lighter strokes, just sort of indicating like that natural movement of the hair. You don't have to get super detailed and paint every strand of hair. Just think of it as one big shape with a lot of movement and just a couple of fine details, like sort of at the end of any hairstyle where the hair is naturally thinner. And I'm going to define this line just a little more where the hair meets the face. And instead of continuing on to the other side of the hair, I'm going to work on face details just because I work left to right and I don't want to smudge the ink. So I'm just going to take a lighter ink here, and I'm going to define her eyebrows just a little more. Just like a couple of quick lines, like in the underneath of the brow where it's naturally darker. And she has a more natural look, so I'm going to keep a lighter hand defining her eye. I'm going to add in the pupil here. And you can see how the white of the paper that I left in previous steps just acts as the highlight on the eye. I'm going to work this side of the eye now together just to make sure they're symmetrical and they have the same amount of makeup on. I'm just going to take my brush with water and sort of soften that line a little more. I don't want her to have like a really harsh makeup look. So I'm going to take some ink with a lot of water to define the underneath of her eye, just to give it more roundness. And you just want to keep it really light. You don't want it like a really harsh line. And just work the eyes back and forth as you see fit until they're sort of like at the right amount of makeup you want, and that they're definitely even. And with that same light ink, I'm just going to define her nose a little more. It just needs a little bit more shading. The more color you add in different parts of the painting, the more color you might need to add in other parts, just to keep the illustration sort of balanced. And I'm just going to use a really light fine line to define her lips and her smile here. I'm not going to outline everything. I'm just going to sort of just straighten up that lip line a little bit, but more where like the darker areas of the lips are, like the underside of the lip. And I'm just going to create a little more roundness. You just want to keep these lines just sort of simple and fun, and just this part is really just bringing everything together, all those paint shapes you worked hard on. This is the final fun part, like where your girl actually comes to life. And the underside of the lip is a little darker. I'm just going to refine this shape just a bit. Sometimes paint bleeds where you don't really want it to, so you've got to sort of contain those tiny little paint spills with your ink. And the black ink is a good cover-up for any paint mistakes that might happen during the course of your illustration. So I'm going to work on her chin now. And just in sort of a light ink. You want the chin to be like just delicate and feminine. And you want to start lighter and then you can go darker. If you do the outline of the face, especially the jawline, in a dark line right away, sometimes it tends to come off too harsh. You just want your girls to sort of be soft and pretty and feminine. So now that that area is done, I can come back up to the top of her hair with some stronger ink lines. Define the shape of her forehead and the hair that's going behind her ear. See that now that line is just a little too dark for the rest of the illustration. So just blot it right up and it blends right in. I'm going to work on the shape of her ear just a little bit. Going to give her a little earring. Just going to work on that cheekbone. Just a nice light ink wash. Going to define that elegant fashion neck. And then the bottom of her hair. Just a couple of strokes just to sort of contain that color and make it one big shape of movement. And I think right now is a good time to go into metallics for her jewelry. And I think a nice bright gold works so well with redheads and pale skin. It's just like, it gives just such a golden sheen and shimmer. So I'm using bright iridescent gold mixed with some water, of course, especially because metallics are a little extra thicker than regular acrylics. So you want to make sure it's mixed really well. Test it on your paper. And then I'm just going to take a smaller brush, like a number 1 or 2. And she's more of a natural girl, so I'm just going to give her a small earring, just like a little simple hoop, just a little accent. And then just a sweet, simple necklace that has some sort of little pendant on it. And then for her top, you know, I think a nice teal will work well, a teal green. So I'm going to take my phthalo turk and my emerald green and mix them together. Add a little water. I don't want to go too dark here because then I'll have to go make the rest of the illustration darker. And we want to keep it sort of just all nice and balanced. And just a couple of quick brush strokes indicating that she's wearing just sort of a rounded shirt, rounded collar shirt. And at this point, I'm going to go back and forth over the entire illustration with some ink lines just to balance everything out. I want to get a little more color at the base of her hair here. A little more definition between the lightness of the hair that's contrasting against the lightness of her skin. And I want to get this little hairline, give it a little more movement. Not too much ink. Lot it up. And I'm going to just finish the illustration with a little contrast ink line for the jewelry. And the top that she's wearing. And then she's going to dry before I do the last step of shadows. So now we're at the final step of the illustration, which is shading. And I usually use a purple for shading instead of a black. And I think people think of shadows as gray, and you don't really want to use gray in your illustrations because it's just going to bring down the brightness of the paint that you worked really hard for. So you want to take your purple paint and quite a bit of water. You can start lighter and always go darker if need be, but it's hard to reverse that. And with your number 6 brush for a space this size, just following what we did with this entire illustration, just start where, hair and shadows naturally occur. Just use your brush to create a little more contrast and movement and shading with your purple. I find it to be a really, really nice enhancement to the overall illustration. So in the corner of her eyes where shadows are. This little part of the nose. And underneath the lip, especially, she's got a nice big smile here. Definitely under the chin, where there's quite a bit of shading, either by the chin or by the hair. A little shading for the jewelry. I'm going to work this side of the face and hairline. And the ear and the cheekbone. Create a little contrast in that earring. And some nice quick lines, just the underside of that hair. And just now you're going to work the whole illustration just to make sure it's all balanced and everything is shaded as you want it to be. So I think she's all set and she's just ready to go on her daily adventures. Thanks for joining me.